center of it, both in terms of the policy and strategy behind it, as well as the execution and management of it. And at least as long as there has been a security cooperation enterprise, there have been FAOs who have complained long and loudly about what's wrong with our security cooperation enterprise and why it needs to be made better, faster, smarter, more effective. Just as often, the security cooperation enterprise has continued to chug along as it has really since the early 1960s, with the same legislative authorities, the same systems in place. That is no longer the case. Over the last several years, there's been an extraordinary amount of activity at both the executive branch level and at the legislative level that have brought a lot of change and dynamism into the security cooperation enterprise. The fiscal 2017 National Defense Authorization Act consolidated a wide, disparate variety of authorities and programs together into a single chapter. Chapter 16, very exciting reading. If you don't have it by your bedside, I encourage all of you to download it. It is an interesting document. Not only does it consolidate authorities, it creates new authorities. It also rationalizes and lays out rules of the road for the management and oversight of the security cooperation enterprise, and really puts the Defense Security Cooperation Agency for the first time very, very clearly in the driver's seat for the management and execution of our overseas SC activities. At the same time, the Department of Defense, through a variety of DoD directives and DoDIs, have talked about the particular technical aspects of how we go about conceiving of, planning for, executing and assessing our security cooperation activities. There have been DoD directives or instructions on defense institution building and assessment, monitoring, and evaluation most prominently, but there have been a wide variety of others. The result of that, I think, has been to create a lot of change, a lot of excitement, but also a lot of uncertainty for FAOs in the field in terms of how does this animal that we've all come to know and love going to change? How do we as FAOs in the field make use of these new authorities and navigate our way through this new system? I think the panel we've brought together for you today, I think, is ideally suited to help us try to sift through some of that uncertainty and get to, I hope, if not clarity, then a better informed level of uncertainty, because it is a moving target. Mr. Robert Helfant is with us today. He is the Principal Director for Building Partner Capacity at DSCA. He comes with extensive, he's responsible for all of the management and oversight of all of DoD's Title X authorities for doing that very important task around the world. And he comes, I think, to the agency with a long history of government service in international affairs and security cooperation, and also a long history from industry before that. Mr. Saul Bracero, as they say in my part of the world, is Nash. Right? He's one of ours. He's a Foreign Area Officer, an Africa FAO of long standing. He is a Division Chief for Institutional Capacity Building, which is another new term that crept into our parlance with the fiscal 17 NDAA. And he will be able to talk to us about that very important subject. Mr. Dave Cate, from the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy, is the Director for Assessment, Monitoring, and Evaluation for the DASD Security Cooperation, which is only the latest in a long line of important positions he's held within OSD policy, all of them related to security cooperation and building partner capacity. Finally, Mike Garrison, here to my front right, is another Africa FAO and another member of the team at DSCA. He is the Principal Director for Workforce Development. So for all of us who are FAOs who are in the security cooperation workforce, I'm sure his comments would be interesting to all of us on a not only professional but a personal level. I would propose the following course of action. We'll begin with Mr. Helfant, followed by Mr. Bracero, followed by Mr. Cate, with Mr. Garrison, I think, wrapping up. I would ask all of our speakers to please limit their remarks to about 10 minutes in the interest of time so that we have ample opportunity for questions. I will relinquish the podium at this point, and please invite Mr. Helfant to come to the floor. Hello, can you hear me well? Is this too loud, too close, too far? Everybody can hear okay? Okay, good. All right. Well, thanks, Rob, for that that introduction, and I'm really very pleased to be here. I think you established the fact that we're in a very tumultuous sort of environment at this point. Lots of change. Before coming to DSCA about 2.5 years ago, I spent most of my career in missile defense, and you tend to think that the world you're in is the most important. Nothing else can compare in terms of op tempo. And when I was leaving, everybody said, "Oh, DSCA, security cooperation, very sleepy environment." And within a year, NDA 17 passed. There's just no shortage of interesting challenges that we face. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be at DSCA, and my intent for today is to give you a little bit of introduction, provide context for the subsequent remarks from Saul, Mike, and Dave on their respective topics. Anyway, again, it's really a pleasure to be here. I got a lot of charts, but I'm not going to use most of them. I'll use a few of them to hit on some key points, and then and we'll move on from there. DSCA mission, I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. We lead the security cooperation community, the execution of security cooperation activities for the department. Our community is made up of anywhere from 10 to 20,000 people. Mike probably has a better feel for what that number is. One of our big challenges is really understanding who all those people are, what they're doing, where they're located. That's not as easy a question to answer as you might think. But really, we feel a responsibility at DSCA as the parent of that community as we look to use security cooperation to advance U.S. interests. Next chart. So this is a bit of a confusing chart, but it aims to get at the complex environment where we live. We put ourselves at the center, as you can see, and within that pentagon you see the assorted communities we need to interface with on a daily basis. We have policy and the joint staff, of course. We have the warfighting community, the COCOMs, and then we have the acquisition side of the house. So policy flows in, that guides our security cooperation activities, but in terms of doing things, acquiring systems or buying things that we're going to provide to partners, we rely on the acquisition community to help us make that happen. So really, we touch all aspects of the department, and that's within DoD, and then externally, we have, of course, a close partnership with the State Department, because security cooperation really must be a tool of our overall foreign policy in many cases, helping us to do things that are constructive with respect to our broader national security objectives. We have partner nations that we have to deal with, so we can't look to just provide stuff and let it end there. We need to have partners that are bought into what we're doing and have their own commitment to this relationship, the role we're looking for them to play. This is not about creating a dependency relationship. This is creating partnerships, truly. So that's an important consideration. And of course, we have an incredibly important relationship with industry, because without their contribution, many of the tools that we have available to us just wouldn't be there. Next chart, please. One more. So let me get at broad issue of SC reform, which really is what drives us here at DSCA on a daily basis. Well, what was the purpose of NDAA that came out in December of 16? Really, it was aimed to help us get at a couple of key questions. And it follows a long history of attention to security cooperation, how we do our business, and we've gone through some fits and starts in trying to reform that process over the years. But with NDA 17, we're really looking to
better understand, I mean, the goal of it is to help us understand what we're spending our money on, how much we're spending on it, what we hope to achieve, and whether we can measure our success in that regard. And if we can't answer those questions, then there's something wrong. And Dave Cate will be talking about AM&E, which is a critical component of that, the architecture that we're trying to put in place to help drive answers to those questions and make that sort of a routine part of how we do, how we plan and execute security cooperation. But really, being good taxpayers of tax stewards of the taxpayer dollar is really what SC reform ultimately will help us achieve. Next slide. This is a little bit more of the same. I would say that when people think of DSCA, they frequently focus on FMS, which is incredibly important and a big ticket item in dollar terms. But with NDA 17, I think there was much greater focus on the Title 10 side of things, and that has has led to some structural changes within DSCA. In my view, I have a discussion with my counterpart in DSCA who manages the FMS side of things, about what's more important. You could measure it in terms of dollar value, but you could also look at it in terms of really using our own taxpayer dollars to achieve U.S. interests. So in my view, the increased attention to the Title 10 authorities and what we're doing there is incredibly important and on par with the activities that we've been doing to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our FMS processes. So as was noted, NDA 17 consolidated authorities into a single chapter, many authorities, not all of them, and gave DSCA responsibility for execution and administration of a good chunk of those. And then OSD policy is responsible for the prioritization and resource allocation decisions associated with those SC activities. So that's incredibly important to have, a belly button, so to speak, where collective requirements that come in from our combatant commanders get racked and stacked and assessed, and at some point a decision needs to be made, hard choices made, and we move out on executing these programs. So the governance structure is really aimed at helping facilitate a more rationalized approach to our Title 10 programs. Next chart. So this is our strategic framework. We've established a set of conditions that we think, when realized, are really the foundation for our security cooperation efforts. So more important than anything else, I would say, is probably the qualified workforce, the effort that Mike Garrison is leading. Without that, everything else that we're trying to accomplish is really put at risk. And we're having a conversation before the remarks part of the lunch started, that if NDAA did nothing other than include the provisions regarding developing a professionalized, certified workforce, that in itself would be an incredible contribution to security cooperation. So that, although the block is the same size as the others, really it's probably more foundational and more important than anything else we're doing. But then you look at the other elements, strategic guidance, right? This comes from policy. If we have coordinated policy that, as the chart says, aligns and drives our interests and drives our program planning, then that's important that we establish that. We have effective execution mechanisms, so we're putting in place these processes right now, building on authorities that we had in the past, learning from what worked and what didn't work, trying to make our processes more efficient and effective. And then full spectrum capability, which is on a subsequent chart. You'll see the fan chart, and I think it's in Dave Cate's brief as well. This really guides us. In fact, let's go ahead a couple of charts. One more. Yeah, there we go. So really, I have a tattoo of this on my left arm. This drives us every day. when we talk about FMS, we typically talk about a total package approach, which means the platform and the spares for a certain number of years, 2 or 3 years. That's that top block. But really, we're trying to transform our discussion from delivering material solutions to all the other things, the non-material elements that we frequently take for granted. And we assume that all of our partner nations have effective personnel systems, logistics capabilities, ability to develop a national security strategy that drives acquisition, for example. All those things that, however dysfunctional at times in the U.S. system, some of these are non-existent with partner nations. So we have a robust set of tools that we can use in the institutional capacity building side of the house that Saul is going to talk about a little bit later, that help us get at these enablers and really help our partners. Like I said, we're not looking to create a dependency. We're looking to create a partnership so that they can fulfill the roles that we collectively think are supportive of our national security interests. Next chart. So at DSCA, we've done some structural changes over the past few years. We executed a matrix structure probably in 2014, I think it was, where we're really regionally focused. But at the same time, we have functional directorates within the agency that feed expertise into those regional directorates. So Captain Nardo Day is the head of our ANS, Africa, Northcom, Southcom, IRT, for example. We leverage FMS specialists, financial specialists, equipping and institutional capacity building specialists into his group. So on a day-to-day basis, as he's working with the combatant commanders, he's got all the tools that he needs to help try and deliver the programs that we think will advance our interests. Something important to note, so last April, just about a year ago, we stood up this BPC group, which I'm involved in. We are, so that's a new element within DSCA. We are not just a headquarters activity, though. We are actually deploying people to the COCOMs, institutional capacity building specialists, AM&E specialists, to help them do the work that they need to do. Because really that's the center of gravity for the development of proposals and activities. So working with SCOs, working with the with the 4s and the 5s at the COCOMs to develop these meaningful proposals. We're not just doing this with a 5,000-mile screwdriver. We're actually putting people in the combatant commands. So that's, I think, it's an exciting time for DSCA, and I think that will be an important enabler. We're going through early phases of that process, getting the right people there and developing the processes and coordination mechanisms in place to facilitate that. But over time, we expect there to be real return on that investment. Next chart. Okay. So I think this will be my sort of get off the stage chart. We talked about our DSCA process. It starts with guidance and then trying to walk from there down to the desired roles we want our partners to play, getting their buy-in, figuring out what the capability and capacity gaps are, right? So this is not, our efforts in the Title X world are not meant to be platform focused. They're aimed at identifying key capabilities that we need to help our partners develop and figuring out what the right platform, what the right institutional capacity elements will support that. So we really try and take this holistic approach, and at the end of the day, again, not a dependency, a partnership, a true partnership with our counterparts. And then obviously that all comes back to the fundamental reason why we do security cooperation is delivering capability, access, as well as building on our relationships. So I'll stop there, and I think Saul Bracero is next, and then I look forward to discussion after. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My first assignment as a foreign area officer was to the UCOM staff as an Africa FAO, working security cooperation for all of sub-Saharan Africa. What I learned there very quickly was that the people working security cooperation were the ones with the carrots, and the people working on the other side of things were the ones without the carrots. And I found that working in Africa and sharing the tools and the capabilities that the U.S. government had with those partners, you know, all of them wanted to be part of that. And so now, all these years later, here I found myself back at DSCA doing something that I found very rewarding back then. What I learned also back then was that often our security cooperation programs were very focused on things and not processes. And so one of the things that NDEA has forced us to change a little bit is not just to look at sharing things with our partners, you know, the shiny objects that they all want to go out and help achieve our national security objectives, but that we also have to focus on the institutions and the processes behind those things. To make sure things are maintained, sustained, and so that it can be employed and they can operate over time, and they don't become what probably a lot of you have seen over the years are trucks that don't drive and airplanes that don't fly anymore. I mean, I was part of some of those transfers myself in countries such as Nigeria and Ghana and things of that nature. So it's forced us into looking at things from a very different perspective, and that Mr. Helfant, the one key slide was that full spectrum security cooperation slide, and we know we're very good at the providing things. What we haven't been so good at is the processes and helping institutions to be better at sustaining those things. So if you go to the first slide, you know, so our mission, we're really looking at that full spectrum security cooperation to help us understand what are the desired partner roles that we want them to play. And we have a really good system that helps them get the equipment. We've had a good system over the years to provide the institutional side of things. I think many of you have worked with some of these institutions. We've got the regional centers, and we've got one of our new directors here from the Perry Center. You've got the Defense Governance Management Team, who your Vice President works for. There's a whole host of other tools that we have at our disposal. But we haven't always used them to our best effects, and we haven't, over time, used them to achieve the overarching objective, the overarching security cooperation objective, our own national security objectives to help achieve those things. So that's one of our tasks, is how do we streamline that? How do we integrate what all of these great tools, institutional capacity building tools, do to achieve our overarching security cooperation objectives? Next slide. So we come up with these critical elements for success. One of the key things that we haven't done very well is identifying our partner nations' institutional capacity gaps. Again, they may be able to absorb a piece of equipment, but does their parliament know they've got a budget for that piece of equipment for the next 20 years? You know, we tell them we fly C-130s that are older than we are, because our government provides funding to maintain and sustain and repair. You know, are we focused on the right? Are we focusing the effort, our resources on the right efforts? I think that's one of the things that we have seen over time with our institutional capacity building programs, is that again, they're not all aimed at the same target. Most of you are graduates from PME institutions. One of the things you learned was the importance of massing the effects of fire. Well, in security cooperation, we need to do the same thing. We need to be able to mass the effects of all these security cooperation tools. We haven't really done a good job at that, ensuring that our institutional capacity building components that the regional centers are doing and other folks are doing are also hitting the same target that our equipping projects are hitting, and the FMS things are doing. And what about IMET? How is that? Are they hitting the same target? I mean, I think all too often we see them not hitting the same target. They're maybe a little scattered, and that's something that we need to re-emphasize. Institutional capacity building, we need to ensure that we integrate those into achieving our desired effort. So again, synchronizing it with other things. We have been a somewhat decentralized approach to institutional capacity building. Again, we've got 5 great regional centers. We really haven't brought them into what they are doing with what the rest of the institutional capacity building tools are doing. We need to figure out how we synchronize that. Our DGMT folks and another program we manage at DSCA, the Minister of Defense Advisor Program, they're often in the same country and they don't talk to each other. So that's not very good. So we got to figure out how we get all that synchronized. So all of these efforts are complementing what our overarching objectives are. So we're doing that at DSCA. I'll show you on the next slide some of the things that we're doing to help do that. One of the other critical pieces is incentivizing our partners. Our partners, as you all know, love getting the shiny object, love to show the aircraft on the tarmac. But they're not so excited about people coming in and telling them how to do their business and telling them, hey, you've really got a gap in your institutional processes here, whether it's budget, human resources, or some other component of the institutional layer that needs to be present to make sure all these things are effective. So again, it comes down to are our partners going to be willing to listen when we show up and when our institutional capacity building tools are there to help them. In often cases, they're really not. They just want the pretty shiny object. So we're appropriately resourcing our department. We have been very fortunate over the last year or so. The Pentagon has approved some positions for us to, as Mr. Helfant said, send some folks to the combatant commands, but we're also hiring people at DSCA, because even within DSCA we haven't really had that institutional capacity building focus. So that when one of our integrated regional teams starts talking about a major component or major security cooperation activity with a place like Saudi Arabia, are we asking them about their institutional capacity components, and are we including in that big huge package of activities things that will help that equipment that we're going to sell them be more effective and sustained over time. So we're appropriately resourcing within our own agency. Next slide. So here's some of the things we're doing inside the DSCA. Obviously, one of the things Rob did not mention along with building a partner capacity directorate that was created last year was my new division, which is the Institutional Capacity Building Division. But we also created a planning and program design division, something we never had in DSCA. Again, it goes back to full spectrum security cooperation. We have a lot of experts in DSCA that knew how to do FMS cases, but maybe not as many that knew how to look at an objective and then look at all the available tools and come up with what security cooperation should look like. Yes, it's going to be material solutions, but then there's going to be some also corresponding non-material solutions, training, advising, and those types of things. So we're establishing that, and all of this is supposed to be done by the GCCs, but we also recognize they don't have the expertise and the capability, especially on the institutional capacity building side, to really come up with solid plans that help them to come up to develop what they need to do with that part. So we're going to be sharing our expertise. We're going to be sending people to help them do that. Centralized management, again, on the institutional capacity building side, we've been somewhat decentralized. We're bringing all that underneath my division now. We're going to be managing that. There used to be out of Dave Cate's office. I keep calling him the grandfather of institutional capacity building for a reason, because he had the vision years and years ago to start talking about this stuff. But even OSD that we're taking on some roles and responsibilities on the program management side that DSCA is now responsible for because of the NDAA. So all that's being centralized and moved under DSCA. Of course, we'll still receive overarching guidance and from policy. We're creating some expertise inside DSCA that never existed before. We're actually hiring people who look at institutions and processes to help partner nations better manage this part of the mission set, to look at non-material solutions to improve their activities. So I won't talk about the security cooperation workforce development. Mike's going to talk about that next. So let's get to the next slide. This one will just be on for just a couple of seconds. This is just a snapshot of Chapter 17. It's not just about equipment, as you see here. So here's some of the subtitles. You got mill-to-mill engagements, you got training with foreign forces, you got support to capacity building. So what this is telling us, again, is this is not just about selling stuff to people, it's about creating capability. And so you have to look at all of those things that are in this chapter to affect that capability. Next slide. And this is my last slide. Actually, I have 2 more slides. This next one talks a little about terminology. I just want to hit this very quickly. In early 2016, the department published the DoD Directive on Defense Institution Building. And that was kind of our Bible for a year. It was the first time it ever was published. And then the NDA 17 came out, and they didn't, very thoughtfully, did not use defense institution building in the law. They used institutional capacity building. And this bottom part of the chart just kind of shows you how we look at that. So what we want to be able to do with these foreign partners is not just work with ministries. You know, there's police forces, border forces. There's also other activities outside of DoD, like what the State Department's doing in security sector reform. That's all part of this. So bottom line, terminology-wise, in DoD, you're going to hear us sometimes say DIB, and you're going to hear us sometimes say ICB. And those are the reasons why, because the law just used a different term, but allows us to look more broadly rather than DIB, as you see in the middle of the chart. And then the last slide that I'll hit on is the process. And next slide, please. And so the key thing here is, you can look at this, and the key part that I want you to take away from this is the bottom line, the bumper sticker here at the bottom. So with the FMS process, as you know, a lot of, when we decide on we're going to sell something to a partner or give something to a partner, it goes to an implementing agency, to Navy, Army, Air Force, to implement that case. There's no such thing for institutional capacity building. All of that still stays within DSCA. We are the implementing agency for institutional capacity building. So we work with all the partners, all the stakeholders for ICB and DIB to come up with those plans. And again, thank you for the opportunity to come speak to you about ICB. So one of those emerging areas we're going to be focused on for the next few years, and we look forward to answering any of your questions at the end of the presentations.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me here today. First off, thanks to all you folks for everything you folks have done in the field over all these recent years with your brother and sister FAOs and security cooperation professionals. RAND published a report a year or two ago, and one of the points they made in that was that it was only through essentially the excellence of our people in the field that help us at all keep a significantly dysfunctional system going. So a lot of our success has truly been on the backs of FAOs spread throughout the world. Before I go to the first slide, here's a pop quiz. First question, it was up there a while ago. Rob Helfant showed a slide. How much money in DoD security cooperation? $8 billion. Here's a pop quiz no one knows the answer to. The DSCA O&M budget for security cooperation in 2002. Nobody knows. I don't know. $65 million. Okay, 50 of that was in what was then called the Warsaw Initiative Fund. Okay, my point being, and you'll see it throughout my comments here today, is that our ambition, our authorities, our challenges have grown, exponentially, and our management processes and training and preparation and guidance and all that has absolutely kept up. Oh, you've actually been out there and done real things, I take it, okay? Okay, so next slide. All right, you've seen it, okay, and you've actually heard. I really appreciate Rob and Saul for making these points. Notice on my slide, weapons is not the top thing. I mean, that goes to our department thinks FMS, okay? Everybody in this room, I would bet, grew up in a world implementing 1999 era, management processes. We sold things through FMS and FMF. We scheduled IMET courses, and there was a scattering of other things that maybe you had access to, okay? We are good at FMS, selling things, making that stuff go. DSCA sells huge numbers of billions of dollars worth of equipment. Nobody goes to jail. It gets there. They're overly maligned sometimes. It's working. It's the other things that we need to figure out. So I keep saying, for resource management or professional military education, right? When you need to sell equipment or move equipment to a country, you know whose phone rings. The people are there, the system is set up, and all of that stuff, right? Who do you call for human resource management design in a partner country? Typically, you've had to make it up, beg the guard to come in. I mean, how has that worked? It's not worked, okay? So I would argue that the Department of Defense needs, for key bins of non-material security cooperation, we need professionals that understand the challenges of that discipline and who understand our legal authorities well enough to reach into IMET, the new flexibility that the Congress has given us on mill-to-mill exchanges, non-reciprocal for mentoring. When does the Department of Defense use that? Not at all, as far as I can tell. Reach into the Guard, reach into military components, all of that stuff. No one integrates those different authorities in terms of that. Those kinds of challenges have fallen on your backs out in the field. Okay? Our department owes much more support to the combatant commands, to the folks in the field doing this work, to help us really come up with a way to implement all of this stuff. Next slide. Why AM&E? The point of my part of the presentation here. We haven't done enough. Congress recognized that. They told us you need to, get on with it. We got the law. At the same time, we basically published the directive or the instruction on AM&E. And I put this little comment down here from, Secretary Mattis. I've seen a few things that the Secretary has written. He is serious about us paying attention to how we're spending our money. This man is serious. So we need to really try to get this right. It's in all of our interest anyway. Next slide. Okay. Hill views, continuous robust evaluations. Are we meeting our objectives? Apply lessons learned. We talk about AM&E in the context of it's for accountability and learning. I'm going to flip that around and pretty much only say, let's just get the learning part right. We don't want this to come across as an IG function. We're coming out to check your homework and penalize you and give you a bad OER. This is about the Department of Defense learning. Where do we need to improve? That's got to be the focus of AM&E, especially in the first couple of years. This is a non-punitive event or activity. Next slide. What have we been doing in AM&E? First off, we sought to understand the community. Lots of people in our bureaucracy use the word assessment. AM&E and the A in AM&E is assessment. What combatant commands and the chairman do in terms of assessments is typically not a security cooperation baseline assessment of the partner's capability. So we wanted to kind of baseline that. We talked to every combatant command that had an assessment office or, and the joint staff and everyone. We're working to integrate AM&E into 333 planning. That's going to be much broader, probably starting at the next fiscal year. We have published about a 30-page document of guidance on planning, on how to conduct the initial assessments, how to make those happen, templates for a logic model and for the initial assessment, and for an initiative design document. Much of our guidance for AM&E was, you need to do all this stuff, and oh, by the way, the development world is ahead of you folks in all this. You need to look at their best practices and processes. So we were guided to OECD DAC and things like that for making sure we were borrowing the best practices. So that is what we have done. We are going to publish, I think monitoring is probably the next huge task that we've got. We've got our initial guidance out. We're starting to work with combatant commands on one initiative design document per combatant command. And I've got a slide or two which I think will highlight the challenge that monitoring is going to bring to the department. We've got to turn our attention to that in our office for sure, and it'll rapidly permeate DSCA and the combatant commands and all of that stuff. We're standing up. I run the AM&E directorate. We need to have a separate independent office. We're working through exactly what that will look like. I think in the end we're going to look at probably 10 or so people with a significant distributed capability in terms of contracts or access to FFRDCs and folks like that. But we'll probably have a core team of about 10 when we get to it. We're working to develop an evaluation agenda. I think we owe it to the department to have kind of a list that we all see what's on there for consideration to do security cooperation evaluations. In order to put that together, we've recently JSAP'd the combatant commands. We want to hear from everybody who has an idea. That's every one of you in this room. That's anyone you know that has a, hey, this is a problem or whatever. My guess is that there will be a number of things that, same observation by 10 different people in 10 different places. That kind of thing can get aggregated up into this is something we need to look at. So we're putting together an evaluation agenda. I've talked about lessons learned. That's the key thing. Lessons identified, lessons observed, not good enough. Half of the effort is going to be on driving through those changes into planning processes educational systems, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to be a lot of work. Accountability and learning, I talked about. Our evaluations that we do, we're required to post a 2 to 4 page summary, unclassified. So stand by for that coming along. We'll see what that looks like. Next slide. This is one slide that I pulled from our guidance document, and it's just to kind of showcase the kind of thinking that the department needs to get to develop, at the top, here's my big objective, this is what I want to get to, and it critically shows, and look at the stuff on the right there in the yellow boxes, it shows the non-material things. This is a real country, this is a real example, which has the benefit of a significant amount of non-material security cooperation, defense governance and management team engagement. So do the equipment, do the training, do the institutional piece, and try to integrate it. Okay? It's an integrated thing. There are other examples that we can show, which are amorphous is the kindest term I can think of. They're not works of art. Next slide. I show this because I think this starts to get to what our monitoring challenge is going to be. This is actually drawn from the country team in Kenya. Keeps a list of all the security cooperation related activities going on in the country. So the ones that are in non-blue up there are by the African Union, their security cooperation activities, the EU in some cases, et cetera, et cetera. And this particular laydown shows me a couple things. Where do we plan security cooperation? We go to our comfort zone. We go to where we grew up. We grew up in train and equip. We've got the system set up. We know how to do that. That's where we tend to work. Look at the paucity of ministerial level activities. Our folks, wonderful people in the field, don't have the background, the guidance, the systems in place, and the support to think through those higher level functions. Saul talked significantly at length about this. That is a challenge for the department. That's the kind of thing our workforce development has got to get to. Then when you start looking at just the number of activities in one particular service or element, and think through if each of those circles represents some objective we're trying to achieve that has 5 constituent elements, you rapidly get to 50, 75 different activities that all need to come true, that all need to be integrated, that all need to be checked by a professional in that function, not in the country of Kenya, but in the function we're working on, in order to make sure that they all did come true and they actually build up to that higher level objective. Okay? DoD does not work that way right now, so we've got work to do. Next slide. When we don't plan well, and this is also drawn from the real world, we wind up thinking through providing $443 million of equipment and a little bit of training to a country where the power probably goes off and some of the floors are dirt. Okay? $0 allocated towards assessments. This to me represents an imbalanced security cooperation plan for a country. And if you saw the logic model that would match to this, the highest level objectives are everything from world peace to bringing Gandhi back to life, and it's all over the map. You couldn't possibly determine what activities are actually going to achieve that higher level objective. Next slide. This is another challenge. We're not out in the world alone. You all clearly know all of that. There are other nations doing work in the same countries that we're posted in. This is going to be both a planning challenge. Is Canada, in fact, working on the thing in Mauritania that we care about in a way that matches our objective? Do we need to work with them, let them alone, et cetera, et cetera? Who makes that decision? My view of our bureaucracy is we do have those contacts with all these countries, but we do it all at different levels, and none of our levels communicate. So I would suggest that's something we need to work on as well. 12 or so different border-related activities, and Spain's activities, 33 spread out throughout a region. There's a lot of stuff going on out there. We don't have our arms wrapped around that. That's going to be a monitoring challenge for the Department of Defense. Next slide. I put this up here. Is General Hooper the senior FAO?
Yes, it is.
General Hooper designed this 6 years ago when he was the AFRICOM J5. The GEF at that time, I won't go into long history, but it had 10 focus areas that were intended as lenses for the department to view security cooperation challenges. It tried to drag us away from our authorities and our authorities stovepiped and think through the functions. So he took 2 of those functions, human capital and institutional capacity, and said, okay, you've given me these 10 focus areas to a combatant command. Here's what I think about them. They are these 13 areas, and you call these AFRICOM focus areas. I would suggest, we've kind of caught up. You've heard a lot of good work and a lot of new systems that are in place and new organization that's in place at DSCA. We've kind of caught up to this thinking. Our challenge remains to implement each one of these, to have teams that understand, how do I do professional military development? How do I think about partner nation defense organizations? Who are our experts in those different functions? Can the COCOMs rely on them for planning, and do they know which authorities they can reach into and which force providers they can call on? Another challenge for us. Next slide. Final wrap-up stuff here. We've got to strengthen planning. We've got to do all these things. We must innovate. We've got to make even more changes than we have so far. And this has got to be a team sport. Kind of all in this together. Once again, thank you, FAOs, for all you've done out in the field, and that you will continue to do. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. This will be an interactive briefing. Who has heard this? We talk about the Workforce Development Program. Yeah, well, you're helping us develop that. It's great to be here. It's great to see a bunch of old friends, associates, and I want to echo everybody's previous speakers. Thanks for inviting us to come speak. Security Cooperation Workforce Development Program. First of all, it's not DSCA's program. It's the department's program. So we're doing this in support of the department, and it's a huge task. The requirements that Congress has laid on the department to develop a truly comprehensive workforce development program are expansive. And you'll see that here shortly as soon as you can get the slides up. So why do this? Why did Congress ask us or task the department to do this? Well, they were concerned about several issues. One, it gets to that the DoD didn't effectively plan security cooperation programs, assessment, monitoring, evaluation entered into this process. And bottom line is that there was really no really comprehensive training program for the security cooperation practitioners. And I'll get to how big the security cooperation workforce really is. For years, we've been saying it's about 10,000. That's changed. Additionally, Congress wanted to increase focus and attention on recruiting, training, retention, and career development of the security cooperation practitioners. There's some huge tasks associated with that. We'll talk about that here shortly. But bottom line, as I said, this whole process is expansive, and we're in a marathon here. We're not in a sprint. The program is not going to stand up in a year, 2 years. It's going to take quite a while. The Defense Acquisition Workforce Improvement Act that we have started in 1994, and it yielded the DAU, it yielded a career tracks within the acquisition community, and it's a very, very robust program. But they're still going through developing some issues on competencies for international acquisitionists and things of that nature. This program will continue to be iterative as it develops. We will do this in phases. I'm very confident of that. How many of you, and here's the interactive part, how many of you have been trained as a security cooperation practitioner? Raise your hand, please. That means DISCs, or the organization formerly known as DISAM. Raise your hands again, please. Okay. How many of you are certified security cooperation practitioners? Nope. How are you certified?
DSCA level 1, level 2, level 3.
International acquisition, or international affairs. Okay, that's not a certification program. It is unfortunate. It has no teeth. The 2017 National Defense Authorization Act provided us the teeth, and that's why I'm standing here today. And that's why I go to work every day to develop this program. Next slide, please. So, we have to start out someplace. And Congress gave us some definitions of what the workforce is. Those first four are pretty standard. SCOs, security cooperation practitioners in the embassies, folks that plan and execute programs at the geographic combatant commands, functional commands, folks that do the same thing in mill departments and also the IAs that support that, so system commands that support different functions, defense agencies, and field activities. But the last two were a little bit of a wild card. Assessment, monitoring, and evaluation. Just heard Cate talk about they're still building the program. So we have to figure out what this really means both for our population, who's doing this, but also pretty significant training and education tasks there. We're working very closely with Dave's group. Some folks out of DIS are going along on their visits that they're having right now with the combatant commands to take the lessons learned so they can start working the curriculum to be able to do this. But we're not going to have, such as we do now, a program that has, if you're a SCO, you're going to go to the overseas course. If you're a CONUS-based program manager in a service, you're going to go to the CONUS course. This is going to be a very different training process. We don't have a really clear optic on how this is going to shake out at the very end, but we know it's going to be very different. I'll talk about that in a minute. The last one, that's a huge group of people. When we conducted a JSAP, a tasker through the department to help the department help us identify what the workforce is, what they do, how much of the time that they spend on different tasks in this. And quite honestly, we had to get into some very serious discussions with some of the services because some operational force elements of this. The Air Force said, we have an air base in let's just say Turkey, at Insulet. Well, part of their mission is security cooperation, just being there. A ship visit to Australia, part of that mission is security cooperation. So we had to rule out some groups of people, security force assistance brigades, huge mission. They're not necessarily part of the core security cooperation workforce. Not necessarily do they need to be certified. They need to be trained in some fashion, and the Army will do that. But they don't need to be certified in security cooperation core competencies, and I'll get to that in a minute. Next slide. So, what did Congress tell us to do? Bottom line, and you can read through this, but bottom line is they told us to develop a program for certification of the DoD workforce. Maintain and establish a school. Help develop a mechanism, for working with the services to appropriately assign personnel to and manage key billets. So what's a key billet? We're still walking through that. But I would submit to you that a SCO chief generally, an SDO DAP most certainly, a program manager chief at a combatant command are key billets. We have a definition we're working with right now. We have to get it finalized, but we're going to ask the services to come back and tell me who, in the combatant commands and the agencies, tell us who you are, what are your key billets. Because it may be a little different in each AOR, maybe a little different in certainly the way the services are built to manage security cooperation. Each of the services have a different office that's responsible for it, very different processes. In the end, they get the mission done, but the Air Force SAF IA is pretty centralized. The Army, DASADEC does an awful lot of it. G357's in the process. Our Navy, there's two components there as well. But that whole process is a little different. So we've got to identify what those key billets are. We've also got to identify who's the permanent part of the workforce and who's the temporary part of the workforce. And that'll come into how we train. Are we going to require a certification for someone that's temporarily in the workforce? We don't think so. But we've got to think about that. This program will include reserves, National Guard. We're working very closely with the Guard Bureau on that too. So when you talk about potentially part-time engagement. We also have to identify the appropriate composition and career of the temporary personnel, as I said, and then identify the positions to be managed. We'll be working with a system to work with the services, the authoritative manpower automated systems to link into a database that we now run on the workforce to be able to have a seamless integration of when Mike Garrison moves from DSCA to Africa Command. That's in there. We already know what that position training certification requirement is. We know that that individual has that certification, essential coding, and so we'll be working on it. The thing I want to really focus on, though, is talking about this piece up here when it talks about professional certification and then a competency-based program. Next slide. So when we talk about competencies, and I'll get to this in a minute, but there's a very delineated process within the Department of Defense that OSD P&R and the Defense Civilian Personnel Advisory Service will manage to actually develop DoD competencies for the workforce. First time it's ever done for security cooperation. Hasn't been done. We have now 9 very high-level base competencies with a bunch of supporting tasks underneath that. AM&E. Dave, you'll be happy, it's one of them. Planning and execution. Several things like that. So it's not necessarily a scope position, it's not, or a function, it's not a function, but it's a competency that's going to reside across the workforce. What we have to do is take those competencies, and almost all of you, in some fashion, especially if you're active, will or you're working in the department, some places a civilian, in the security cooperation workforce, will in fact be asked very soon by DCPAS, Defense Civilian Personnel Advisory Service, to participate in a survey to help look at and validate what those competencies are and what they mean to you and where it fits. That's part of the process. As we take this thing forward, we will then take these competencies and then turn them into work with DLA and work on some training or curriculum development folks with curriculum development issues with our school at DIS to actually develop the training and education program that will follow in the program. Competency-based, specifically in the law for this program. So what have we done this year? Well, we established my directorate. My directorate's fairly new. It started in October of, quite honestly, October 16 with 3 people, 2 of them being detailed, and me is the only guy that's really been doing it full time. And then we've slowly grown. We've also, last June, the director put DIS underneath workforce development, since it's directly tied to what we're doing. We had to figure out how to eat this elephant, and generally it's one bite at a time. But we wanted to make sure that we had buy-in from the department, so we established a very large community of interest, about 200 people from across the department in the security cooperation community or enterprise. To actually help us build this. So we developed this large working group, and we established some sub-working groups to go after scoping the workforce, how big is it, the definitions, the competencies, so forth, a training certification sub-working group, and then below that, a management and tracking sub-working group. So we've been doing that. We've been doing it for over a year. We consistently have at least 80 or 90 folks at our large working group meetings that happen about every other month. And these sub-working groups have been meeting weekly doing this for over a year. Great support from all the services and the combatant commands and agencies. We executed this tasker, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. Congress told us to publish interim, I will talk about it the next slide. Congress told us to issue interim and final guidance. Can you go back to the last slide, please? What is interim and final guidance? It's not a DODD and it's not a DODI. They will follow. But there are 2 documents now, and I'm happy to say that the final guidance document was signed by the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy on the 8th of this month. And so it lays out the requirements for the management and the administration of the program. And it lays out some markers for the services and the combatant commands to look at and be able to understand that we're going to be coming back out for requesting more information and seeking their participation in some of this. We worked very extensively. I talked about the competencies piece with OSD PNR and DCPAS specifically, and other DoD SMEs to develop these competencies. And as I said, there's going to be some more work on this as we move forward. Drafted this training certification framework. That will actually be to the director in a briefing on the 5th of March. We received concurrences on the final guidance, so that's done. And then we had a congressional reporting requirement, which is in tasking to you guys today. Next slide, please. So how big is the workforce? I said earlier it was 20,000. I think Rob said anywhere between 10 and 20,000. This is self-nominated security cooperation workforce using those congressional definition, or that congressional definition of what the workforce is, by the services, the combatant commands, the defense agencies. All the regional centers, your office, actually you guys didn't really participate very well.
We're like that.
Yeah, I know. Joint staff, all of those folks, and there's over 20,000. Now I think when this gets normalized, the number will actually come down a little bit. But the reality is, it's a much bigger population than we really thought it would be. I mean, 20,000 practitioners across the enterprise. We even asked for and looked at what are the contracting requirements. And that the man years, the FTEs on contracts for the security cooperation business process is huge, just huge. So you can see the numbers there. I'm not going to go into those in detail. Next slide, please. This is Nirvana.
But the SCOs and SEO data, do they fall under the services?
Yes. We can break this data out in a whole bunch of different ways, and this tends to be about the most convenient, at least for a group like this. So this is Nirvana. And let me talk to this very briefly. I've been given the high side. The wonderful thing about being the last person on the podium is that you usually get about half the time to do what you got to do. And I didn't talk long, so I'm probably getting my full 10 minutes. But so this slide has been around for quite a while. And what we're building is a career model. Not for an SC. We're not developing a career path. But we're looking for a process by which security cooperation practitioners, civilian and military, can find their way up to positions, certainly at the senior field grade for military, but then into the flag ranks in SES level. Now that top block right there, and I'm sure General, you'll be able to talk more eloquently about the general officer management processes, but that's a little harder to get. Previous DSCA director really was not happy with bringing very senior folks in from the side of the pyramid. He wanted everybody to go through and have milestone tours. And so this is what this depicts. Experience on the left, training requirements on the right. So what we will have, and this is again notional, what we will have in the end will be a continuous learning, tiered certification program for all security cooperation practitioners. That will include grandfathering experience and training that you all have already had in the active components and the civilian workforce. Next slide. So where are we going? We got a lot more work to do on the data. We have the competencies to socialize, finalize, the career paths, identification of SC billets, all of those things listed there. What does it mean to FAOs? It means that what the experience and the education you receive will be taken into consideration as we move this thing forward. We need your input as we move this thing forward. But it also means that there will be a certification process, and the training you get, as has been discussed here. We do FMS really well at this. Not so really well suited to train the other Title 10, AM&E, some of the other more significant planning processes that need to be involved in be inherent in the security cooperation workforce. Not everybody will be a strategic planner, but there will be some strategic planners. So as we move this thing forward, we really look forward to working with all of the FAOs in the community, which quite honestly, FAOs in the total scheme there is about 30%. There's a huge number of civilians, huge number of other folks that are part of this process, so we've got to balance that out. So I think that's my last slide, and I look forward to taking your questions in the panel discussion if we have that. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank the panel and ask the panel to join, if they can, join us back up here at the head table, and then we will transition from briefing to discussion and questions. While the panel is joining us, I'd also make an announcement, since at the end some of you may be heading towards the doors. But if you enjoyed the subject today, I think you'll definitely enjoy what we have on the calendar for the rest of the year. Lieutenant General Hooper has just agreed to be the keynote speaker at our annual black tie dinner. So you'll be getting a save the date message here shortly, but the 3rd of May at the Army Navy Country Club is when that event's going to take place. So more to follow. You'll see a save the date message shortly, and probably information about ticket sales by the end of March. But we're very excited about that as well. So I will take the moderator's prerogative of asking the first question. And I think that Mr. Garrison's slides in particular, for somebody who's a career FAO, piqued a lot of interest. I'm sure my career was typical of many of the people in the room. My first 2 utilization tours out of the Command and General Staff College in the FAO involved a job in Moscow where I managed about $500 million a year in security cooperation funding through the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. I then moved to UCOM, where I was a branch chief of UCOM J5, where we were doing policy oversight and strategy for about $500 million in security cooperation funding. And I received no training of any kind for either of those two jobs in security cooperation, managing security cooperation. So this is a huge step forward. But most of us have been through that, right? You learned what you learned through discovery learning, and you got the formal training if and when you ever actually had a formal job as a SCO or in a SCO office. That's clearly going to change. So the first question is, this is a very distinguished, I wouldn't say old group of FAOs, I would say distinguished group of FAOs. But at the same time, right now, out there in the services, there are a lot of young captains, young commanders, lieutenant commanders, going through the FAO training pipeline. What should their career progression look like? How do they gain the skills necessary to be able to operate in this new environment? And what should the different FAO proponent offices and the services be doing to the way we select, train, grow, and promote FAOs to meet the requirements of this new environment?
I assume that's me.
Yes, and there's a mic over there you can pass around. But that's for the whole panel, but I would start with you, Mr. Garrison.
You guys want to talk? Happy to have you.
I got a comment. So I think selection, I mean, we select wonderful people. I think the department needs to come to grips with what our FAO's for, and if it's for a whole range of management of security cooperation, we're addressing through Mike's programs the training that's required. There's a DoD instruction and a DoD directive on FAOs. There are 4 words in there that relate directly to security cooperation. Everything else is about all your cultural acumen and language skills and all the Paul Mill and all that stuff, right? So if we truly want to, use the FAO Corps in a completely different way, we just need to come to grips with it, which I think is what Mike is leading.
The security cooperation selection, assignment process, and training process, to be honest with you, has been a pickup game. It's ad hoc. Congress told that to the previous DSCA director in almost those exact words. Previous DASD for SC certainly agreed with that. That's why we have the program today that we're building. The reality is that we have folks out there managing billions of dollars of security cooperation programs for countries. And they have had, some of them, 3 days of security cooperation training in an executive tutorial. Now, the Joint Strike Fighter program, billions of dollars, led by a lieutenant general that is a certified program manager, has gone through years of training. There's a difference. We're both dealing with billions of dollars. They're both dealing with billions of dollars of programming and program execution. But they're very different. To be a defense attaché or to be an attaché, there is a prescribed pipeline and training process which DIA solely manages. 14 weeks, plus your language, plus if you have to drive an airplane, things of that nature. We are lucky sometimes to get people even into the overseas course for SCO. Service requirements generally override a lot of the SC training requirements. There's FACT training that we have to now go through for foreign affairs counterterrorism training. So what we're trying to do, and we're going to work with the services, because the services own the people, we don't, and we don't want to. But we need to be able to come to an accommodation that the SC training has to be up there at a very important element of that preparation going over to do this mission. We're working with the Joint Staff J7 on joint training requirements to ensure that once we have established the certification requirements, they'll be folded into a joint training requirement. Some of it will be conducted in PME institutions within the services. Some of it will be conducted at our school, which I didn't talk about. We are developing the Defense Security Cooperation University, which is more virtual than BRIC. We will execute that. But some of it will also be done by partner institutions like DAU. Our program management folks, our acquisitionists, have a very dedicated, rigorous training program. We don't want to add on to that and create it too onerous for the acquisition community. So we've got to make sure that we have reciprocity on training requirements, so there's some we can use their credits and they can use ours. So to answer the question, it was a pickup game. This program will eventually make that less of, certainly not a pickup game anymore, more professionalized process, more institutionalized process.
Questions from the floor, sir, please. If you can identify yourself and then speak up so the whole room can hear you.
Bill Dank with the Stevenson Group for Mr. Helfant. Regarding the capacity builders being deployed to the COCOMs. I guess the question is, have all those people been deployed? Is that one person per COCOM? What does their position description look like? What are their duties there? And then when I heard discussion of monitoring, then I started feeling, well, it's the COCOM feel there's a monitor in the house watching what the COCOM is doing. So what kind of culture, environment is that person or person there for? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I think an element of that I'll defer to Saul with respect to the specifics of the position description, but let me tell you that those people aren't at the GCC just yet. So the process for getting approved billets is onerous, and the process for filling those billets is equally onerous. And so we are working through that. We've got a commitment for the next fiscal year, FY19, to bring those people on board that we're deploying overseas. So that's, like I said, that's in process. But that doesn't mean we're not trying to get those position descriptions and all that administrative side of it sorted out. I want to make it. You asked about whether the GCCs believe there'll be a monitor in the house. So I want to distinguish a couple of different elements of, for example, well, there's monitoring, which is sort of within the program, figuring out what the appropriate indicators are of success, and trying to make sure you understand as you're designing a program what those indicators are, and then putting in place the means to track those over time. There's the evaluation piece, and we talk in terms of Big E and Little E. Dave Cate owns the Big E evaluation. That's centralized in OSD policy. Are we achieving big, broad strategic objectives? The Little E is one of the elements that our forward deployed folks are going to be involved in. But those are looking at specific activities, trying to understand based on the program that was designed, and then the indicators that were established, then doing the program level evaluation, more tactical, I would say, to see whether you're making progress along the path for a partner being able to perform a certain role. Yes, but so there will be sort of evaluators in the house, but as Dave said, this is not meant to be punitive in nature. This is about learning and having the ability to adjust course as necessary as you're moving through this process. We want to develop longer-term program plans, security cooperation plans, but at the same time, those are not fixed in stone. Those are meant to be adaptable as strategic conditions change and as indications on the ground change. So that evaluation process, having those evaluators at the GCs is going to be important, again, for the purposes of learning and adjusting course as necessary, not for the purposes of being a GAO or IG type person. And then in terms of position descriptions, I mean, that's all in development. Saul, do you have any comments on that?
No, I would just highlight that the type of people we want to send to the combatant commands are people who are going to help in the planning and design of security cooperation. And so, just as an example, my division will be sending one person per GCC to look at institutional capacity building and logistics, security cooperation. As those security cooperation plans are developed, yes, there's a J4 with a lot of logisticians in it, but none of them are trained or have institutional level background. So there are a lot of majors and lieutenant colonels with well-intentioned, but they just haven't advised and done assessments of a partner nation to understand where there may be logistics gaps. So that's the kind of thing we want to provide to the GCCs. We're not, and I think that's why it's going to be well received by them, because it's going to fill a perceived gap in their capabilities. And so one of the positions will be an institutional capacity building logistics person, and then we're also going to send some folks to help them with the A&E part and the planning and design part. So those PDs are being written as we speak, but it's to fill those kind of gaps that the GCCs admittedly understand that they have gaps in.
Gentleman in the back there.
Scott Switzer with Booz Allen Hamilton with a question primarily for Dave Cate. I want to thank you for a lot of the work that's been done recently on the guidance for DIB and on AM&E, on security cooperation, prioritization, and planning. We've got some really good documents that came out of OSD to help us along with that. My primary criticism is that the guidance seems to have vastly outrun execution. If you look at the GCC country campaign plans across the globe, you get different levels of detail, different formats, different timelines, different taskings, and very little in the way of resource identification and metrics. Is there what's the next step? How do we get to the next step where, especially for somebody at the service level like me, in trying to identify resources, we can get some sort of standard based on those guidance documents that come out?
We're not going to do anything else. It was a hand grenade. We tossed it out to the department. How's it going?
Yeah.
You know. No. So I think we had. I agree with both sides of what you said. I think the product that you put out is good stuff. The capability throughout the department and the challenge out there is huge. I think it would have been a mistake for us to soft pedal it and say, we put out, this is what world class looks like and we need to get there. All the people here at this table are trying to make that capability come true. I mean, that's why I started off with, we've layered on new authorities and new concepts and all that stuff, and only in the last couple of years, really, are we starting to add on management capability, thinking about, hey, DSCA needs to provide people to the combatant commands, right? That brand new, and my guess is it's 1, 2, 3, 4 people right now. It'll be 15 by the time we're done with well-defined, job descriptions and things they're supposed to be doing. Monitoring's going to be huge. Saul said they're there for the planning function. That's critical. We are behind. Dave Cate's part of the department is behind on providing support to the combatant commands. We are working with the services and the COCOMs. Everybody knows what we're doing, and I think everybody who's watching this can see clearly the disconnect you just identified. We are where we are. We're working hard to try to catch up.
Sorry. Scott, just to add one more thing. So I think one of the things that's going to change is that in FY20, the department is going to be looking at, we touched on full spectrum security cooperation. In the past, we were issuing guidance for DIB and guidance for the regional centers and guidance for this and that. In the future, it's going to be guidance for security cooperation. So it's going to tie all those things together as opposed to have something just for DIB. There may still be some documents that kind of refine what we're doing in the Defense Security Building in ITV, but all of those things will be tied to an overarching objective, a national security objective, and it will help to define how the tools are going to be used to achieve those objectives.
My name is Alex Stevens. I'm twice retired as a FAO and as an FSO. I'm an old guy with an old problem that's going to come back. After 9/11, I was the country director for Poland and the Baltics and OSD policy. Get the Baltics to NATO and get the Polish-led multinational division in Iraq was the two major things for the 2 years I was best. The system for capacity building within the EUCOM side worked very well. We had an excellent cooperation with the EUCOM J5, with the OEC chiefs, with the attache, with the State Department desk also, with DSCA. We then deployed elements to CENTCOM into the black hole. There was absolutely no mechanism for getting any feedback back on how the units that we had deployed actually worked. The best evaluator is the hostiles, of course. But there was absolutely nothing on which you could adjust fire for the next iteration. And it actually would probably only take a small team to go around and ask the U.S. commanders for some sort of evaluation mechanism, not for the units in country that you're developing, but the ones that are deployed in and put in a forward operation.
I will echo that. In 3 years on the EUCOM staff, the one question we could never get an answer to is, from, and I apologize in advance to anybody in the room from CENTCOM, but the one question we could never get an answer to was, how are we doing? How are the forces that we are helping to train and equip to get into the fight, how are they actually performing on the ground? And we never figured out how to get that answer.
Now, I asked the DACs, at least on the political side, to put a cable out, one tail from the front, so someone would know what was going on. We didn't even know where they were.
Quick observation. I was TDY to CENTCOM to put the Polish division together. Just a little bit of history. And so I'm not disputing anything you said. I will tell you though that during the build-up to that, I mean, this was the first time we've ever done this in recent history. It was a significant challenge. CENTCOM was leading the planning effort, which we were doing. EUCOM, very smartly though, had the Poland desk officer from EUCON attend every meeting that we were at. So Scott Butler. So he was with us at every meeting. I think that connection should have been sustained after that. We didn't do that, and that I think was a shortfall. So.
Hey, Rob, thanks for bringing us down together and making this event happen. So my question's for Mike Garrison, but I'm not really like the media where, like, when I ask a question, I already know the answer. I don't know the answer to this one. So, at one point during the security cooperation FMS process, if you're giving equipment or services, that's all going to funnel through one point eventually, which is contract. And that's going to be a bottle. In your security cooperation workforce development program, you may envision involving contracting officers, having them involved in learning some of the tools. There's nothing harder than if you're working on a program and it's going along real well, but selling a glass of China to the Army is different than selling it to a foreign country. There is something quantitatively different than a contracting officer working at the necessary level.
Short answer is yes. There's several fronts to that. Again, competency-based certification. So if we look across the competencies and we look across the subtask, contracting is part of that. So we have to embed that competency in to be trained across the entire workforce. At some level, some more, some less. Contracting officers, specifically with DWIA, we will have to work with DAU and OSDA and S to be able to ensure that we have agreements to ensure that what DWIA's training addresses the security cooperation elements of that. We've already started that process a bit between DIS and DAU and vice versa. So the answer is yes. It's contracting, it's logistics, it's transportation, it's all of those different elements that are part of the Jenga machines that is the security cooperation, the system of systems that is the security cooperation FMS program. That answer?
Great answer.
Sorry, over here, Air Force officer.
Sean Kimiko, I'm going out as SDO DAP to Czech Republic in a few months. A handful of service attaché assignments, and then for penalty for doing bad work is I was General Davis's LNO to Embassy Kabul with CSTICA. So no one here has nodded their head and said that's just a terrible idea. Everything that y'all have said about hey, we're going to get our own enterprise, our DoD enterprise in order, ABCD. We're going to train the people. We're going to believe that everyone here is saying the same thing, and not in north-south. From that time sitting there just melting at the embassy in Kabul, I wonder if you can shed some light, maybe to Mr. Cate, but I'll bump the volleyball over to all of y'all. A board of governors, or something where we bring our DoD, hey, this is what we're doing, this is how we think it's smart to stay to commerce, to sort of mirror that old dime term that came after the Pentagon. To do a total force of USG to, this is what we would like the country to do, be it whatever country.
I would tell you, I think we've got nibbles at that. I mean, the Security Governance Initiative is security cooperation across the institutional level of the security sector in 6 countries in Africa. It's the only structure we have where multiple agencies get together and at least think about the problem. It's probably about a third of what it could and should be, but it's the only program that's there. This is a political challenge and probably a COCOM challenge. I would suggest that all the other combatant commanders don't understand it. Why is there not a drumbeat from political leaders and from combatant commanders saying, I would love for some of my key countries to participate in a program where all of these agencies get together and do this? Illustrative, 9-10 years ago, the 3D SSR paper, many people in here probably heard, not so some. It's illustrative that 3D SSR paper had limited buy-in to the extent that it was only approved at the assistant secretary level among 3 departments. And it was put out there as we think this is a good idea without action. We can't get senior political leaders to buy into the notion of SSR. That said, I briefed state community practice on AM&E yesterday. We need to do a little bit more effort to pull together the willing folks in multiple agencies who do want to have this discussion. You're exactly on point. We need to do better. And I'd love to see a pull from the COCOMs, Joint Staff, and political leadership in OSD.
I'll just add that for some specific authorities, we, joint formulation is key to how we move forward. So we work very closely with the State Department. We just participated in some SSA roundtables earlier this week, where it's a much wider group of interagency folks trying to align the different pots of money and authorities across our departments to make sure that we're not operating at cross purposes, we're not duplicating activities, so we get, as Dave mentioned, the best bang for our defense buck in cooperation with our partners.
I think we have time for one more question.
Reed Anderson, the formerly school chief in Tunisia. Grateful for the words that we heard today. It's enheartening to hear the direction in which we are going. Heard several references to planning, and the question I have is for the planning competency, what process or model do you intend on using to develop that planning competency?
Next question. We're still working through that. We're going to reach out to the 59 community on strategic planners. We're going to look across the services, the Army 59 community. We're going to work across the services, but we don't have that yet. We're going to rely on some work with DLA to help us develop some of that. But it's a great question. Currently, the Army and the Marine Corps run an SC, their own specific service, SC planners course. It gets to some of that, but it's pretty service specific. We envision, and we've talked with both the Marine Corps and the Army about creating a joint planners element of this and then letting the services branch off into their service specific issues. But there's a lot more work to be done on that. But a great question, and sorry I don't have a really great answer for it.
So I just one quick follow-up to that. A lot of people will talk about using JP5 as a model because it's something that the military is used to and all of that. I think we need to be cautious. There's a graphic in JP5 which shows a very orderly flow. The commander gets a task, he reaches out to this, he checks meteorology. I mean, it's all of those things. And the difference between, you cannot just take that model and say apply it to security cooperation, because I think the services do a great job. Every person that commander talks to, every task that he does, every organization he needs to reach out to is an expert in their function. And that is not mirrored in the security cooperation realm. Who is the lead for defense organizations or human resource management systems or whatever? If that expert lived out there, you could exactly mirror JP5 pretty much, because there would be experts that you could consult and you wind up at some logical conclusion. So JP5 is useful as a model to think about. You can't just take it and apply it. And many people try to do that.
Okay. So I think we've had a very interesting conversation. I think we've probably only just scratched the surface of this, and this is going to be an ongoing topic of conversation for everyone in the FAOA community for a long time. So I suspect this will not be the last time that we gather around our lunch tables to talk about some of these issues or to talk with many of the people we have before us. So I would like to thank everyone on the panel, first of all, for their insight and for helping us to better understand what's going on.